What's going on, guys? In this one we're just going over the best way to set up a bioactive terrarium and the most common things that you'll want to think about and include in whatever terrarium you're setting up. First off, a bioactive terrarium is going to be any self-sustaining terrarium. Typically includes like an organic substrate, live plants, some sort of cleanup crew, beneficial bacteria, and a lot of times you'll end up having some sort of larger main animal in that setup. Most people will set these up to mimic a certain animal's natural range so they can have a healthier lifestyle and you can have a little prettier terrarium to look at. Now the first key component to really any bioactive setup is going to be your substrate. This is going to be where a lot of your beneficial bacteria and cleanup crew is going to live, as well as provide nutrients for any plants that you have in and retain a lot of moisture for any plants and animals that you have living in the terrarium. When you're making your substrate for whatever you're going to put in your terrarium, you really want to consider all three of those things. I always like to try to mix some dead sphagnum moss into the soil. That's going to help retain a lot of moisture and humidity for both plants and keeping the humidity higher in the tank if you need that for your animal, as well as some things that will slowly break down and feed a lot of the cleanup crew and provide nutrients for those plants, such as orchid bark, cocoa fiber, leaf litter, anything like that that you're going to find naturally outside. You're going to want to make your soil as close to that as possible. On a side note with the substrate, you're going to want to always make sure that you've got a drainage layer in that tank for excess water to drain out of that substrate so it doesn't start to mold, but I have some other videos on that if you'd like to check those out too. Once you've kind of got the substrate set up for whatever you're going to need, the next choice is going to be whatever live plants that you're planning on putting in. Now a lot of times you'll have picked out kind of the substrate and how you want to set that up depending on what plants you have, but I always recommend some hardier plants just because at the beginning it's going to be a lot harder to regulate either humidity as well as nutrients, and with those hardier plants you'll be able to have something in there that stays green, and then you can mix in a few other plants that you're not sure how they're going to do. Kind of watch those. If they die, that's okay, just nutrients for the rest of the system. But those live plants are going to be a big piece of what makes this look bioactive and actually be bioactive, because they'll be taking a lot of that waste and nutrients that the cleanup crew breaks down, pulling it out of the substrate so things don't just sit there and start to waste. Just as a few examples for easy plants to keep, pothos is always great. You're going to have your air plants such as tillandsia that are very easy to keep. Mosses always add a great look to a terrarium and are very easy to keep alive. Lots of species of ferns, as well as bromeliads. Kind of get those nice bright flowering plants in there as well. Whatever plants you choose, make sure you're doing research beforehand for whatever species that you're going to be planning to put in the tank. Make sure those plants are safe, because at the end of the day, you're going to want to keep everything alive that you put in that terrarium. The next big thing you want to think about, I've already mentioned, is that cleanup crew. Always a great option is going to be springtails. They're essentially just tiny little bugs that go through, they eat moss, mildew, and any other organic material that's going to need to be broken down so that the plants can then use it again as nutrients. So you've got the springtails. You can also do snails or isopods. Those are both great cleanup crews as well. Biggest thing to consider with them is whether or not you want to take some of the attention away from whatever else you're putting in the tank. The springtails really aren't going to draw much attention. The isopods and snails potentially will, even if they are hiding a little bit more. The next big thing to consider is going to be heating and lighting. If you pick an animal that doesn't need a lot of light or heat, sometimes that can be easier, but make sure you know if you're not going to put any specialty heating or lighting in there, putting it in a room that's going to have enough light or enough warmth to keep that animal and those plants healthy. If you are planning to add lights, make sure you get the right kind of lights for whatever you're keeping. A lot of plants and animals do a lot better with UVA or UVB, or actually require those things. The biggest struggle with any bioactive terrarium is going to be making sure that the balance in the ecosystem is set just right. It's always recommended that you set up the terrarium, and before putting any animals in it other than your cleanup crew, you let it sit and kind of hit equilibrium for a little while. A lot of times when you first set it up, you'll have a bit of a mold outbreak, and then that cleanup crew will grow in size, take care of those, and it'll kind of just slowly even itself out, and then you can make sure your plants are growing, surviving, have time to get roots grown into the soil, so any animal you put in there isn't going to be ripping those up. But I always plan on a couple weeks or even months of setting that up. This terrarium I've had behind me, it's been set up for about a month and a half. In that time, we've seen a little bit of mold outbreak. That cleanup crew, like I said, it grew, and we're kind of starting to hit equilibrium with that. It's looking like I may need to get some separate lights for that moss to grow a little bit more of how I'm hoping, so we'll probably start to do that before I even think about getting any sort of animal in that terrarium. I will have a video coming out on this terrarium here in the next few weeks, so if you want to make sure to watch that, hit that subscribe button, follow along for that build. So in conclusion, the biggest things to think about are going to be substrate, your plants, whatever animal you're going to keep in there, your cleanup crew, and just that regular maintenance. Make sure you're always maintaining these. You have to trim the plants back and everything that way. But when you're setting these up, give yourself some time to enjoy it. Make sure everything's set up. And these bioactive terrariums, whenever they are set up right, are a much better habitat for whatever animal you're going to be keeping. So I hope that gives you a better idea of how to set up a bioactive terrarium. Any questions or comments, please leave below. And if you want to see a few of the bioactive terrarium builds, I'll link a few here at the end. Thanks for watching.